Hello everyone, welcome to the first webinar in the MOOC addressing the global crisis. I am Alexandra, I'm your TA, and I look forward to hearing all your questions. And so, yeah, let's start. And I hope that you have many questions, burning questions for our very interesting subject. So yeah, let's start. And if you have any questions, just post them and Stefan will answer them. But we'll start by welcoming Stefan to this MOOC. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Alexandra, I should start now. Is that correct? Or is there more from your side?
No, that is correct. You go ahead.
Okay, welcome everybody. Let me start with a few opening remarks. This module is largely about SDG 6, the water and sanitation goal. I hope you had the time to study some of our video lectures as well as the material that has been uploaded. In a nutshell, you know, the whole 2030 agenda is a very ambitious agenda. It's different from the Millennium Development Goals agenda from 2020, or from 2000 to 2015, because in a much more commitment has been displayed from the global leaders for the whole agenda. In particular, there's an own goal for water and sanitation, the SDG 6, which goes much wider than only water supply and sanitation. Water supply and sanitation was maybe the main focus of the MDGs when it comes to water, to some extent also ecosystems, water requirements. But the SDG agenda is really a wider agenda. SDG 6, beside water supply and sanitation, it also includes aspects of hygiene, water quality, wastewater treatment, or the lack of it particularly, but also water use, water scarcity, water use efficiency that need to be increased, water management, water and ecosystems, as well as the means of implementation for achieving that agenda. So the cooperation when it comes to water, but also participation in decision making. So it's a much wider agenda. To describe the process of where are we with SDG 6 and how far is the global community in achieving that goal, UN Water published in June last year the SDG 6 synthesis report, and I had the pleasure to coordinate that effort over the last 2-3 years. And what this report shows, we are not on track. The world is not on track with achieving SDG 6. We really have to reinforce our efforts. Often it goes in the right direction in terms of the development goes in the right direction. There's more people having access to basic water, more people having access to basic sanitation. But the objective is, for instance, safe water and safe sanitation. And we see often it goes in the right direction. Sometimes it goes in the wrong direction also. For instance, when it comes to ecosystems, we have seen a degradation of ecosystem over the last decades. But even if it goes in the right direction, the pace is not sufficient. So we have to run faster. We have to accelerate the speed when we want to achieve this goal by 2030. These were a few opening remarks which I wanted to share with you, and I'm open for further questions. Over to you now.
Okay, Stefan. So first question is, do you think we will be able to achieve SDG 6 clean water and sanitation by 2030? Why or why not?
I'm an optimistic person, so I believe, yes, we can. We can. If we scale up our commitment, if we scale up the necessary resources, and also if we accelerate the speed a bit more. If we see, for instance, take the target on integrated water resources management. That's a very important target. It includes the others are also important, but I'm just giving one example. Integrated water resources management is a complex process, something where you cannot quickly make progress by installing some infrastructure. No, it's a complex process which touches on all aspects related to water management. This target also has the transboundary component. So it talks about how far integrated water resources management is also applied at an international scale. If we see how long it takes to really improve the policies the strategies in different countries to really make significant progress in IWRM. If we see how long it takes to make progress in the joint transboundary operations and management of transboundary water resources, that takes often many years. And if you then look at how far are we with integrated water resources management now, and how if they extrapolate that speed for the coming years, it's unlikely, because it takes many years to agree on, for instance, operational arrangement in transboundary water management. So if we keep the current pace, it's unlikely that we achieve this for all shared river basins. So overall, I'm optimistic, but we need to move a little. We need to move faster. I could give other examples, but I would like to give more opportunities to more questions also.
All right, thank you very much, Stefan. So a second question is, how reliable are the progress data estimates for SDG 6? What kind of quality control measure does the JMP employ to guarantee the accuracy of country data? And this comes from Dominic.
Thank you, Dominic, for a very good question. Dominic was referring to the JMP data, the data coming from the Joint Monitoring Program. That's a program that UNICEF and WHO are implementing. It provides the basis for the target 6.1 and 6.2. So these are the targets to drinking water supply, 6.1, and 6.2. That's the target for sanitation. If you look at the JMP is the program, I think it's since 27 years or something like that, maybe 28 years by now. It's going on, and they have been collecting a lot of data and a lot of parameters. My first response to Dominic's question is that the data of the past has been focused on what is called basic drinking water and basic sanitation. There's a certain definition what basic sanitation and drinking water is. However, in the SDG, our targets 6.1 and 6.2, the level has been raised. So the target was increased by having so-called safe drinking water and safe sanitation. Safe drinking water is, for instance, defined as water that is accessible 24/7, so ideally when you need it, that it's accessible in your house, or commuting time less than 30 minutes, and that it's also contamination free. If one of these three criteria is not met, we speak about basic water. Now, the question was about quality control. The UNICEF and WHO, they do their utmost to assure to only use good data, and they're, well, from my assessment, I would think that they are rather conservative. They rather say insufficient data or no data for this country instead of giving a misleading data set. On the other hand, it is not that the UN or the JMP program sends out troops of people going to the countries doing all these measurements. No, it is depending on existing data monitoring efforts, and the idea is to collect this data and to valorize it through this program. And existing data sources include the DHS data collection. I think it's a USAID sponsored supported program, which is around the world. It also includes country census data, and as well as other data sources. However, these data drives are as good as you can, but it always depends on the people who are out in the field and collect the data. To finally answer your question, I think JMP colleagues are doing really the utmost to assure good quality data, but they are dependent on a number of steps that happened before in the countries, done by independent observers, done by statisticians in collecting the raw data and synthesizing it. So I hope that answers your question. Next question, or if Dominic has a follow-up question, I'm also happy to respond to, or try to respond to it. talking about data quality, I'm just, as soon as I get a new question, please interrupt me. Then I think data quality is really very critical. If you look at the degree of IWRM, that's a indicator 6.1, it's a very important one. There was a methodology was developed by the colleagues from UNEP, DHI, the UN Environment Program, DHI, and what they used to measure the degree of IWRM, they developed a questionnaire with almost 40 questions, which with a lot of information about how to fill it in. Then there is a self-appraisal process in the countries where people are trained to fill in that questionnaire, to answer that appropriately. There's additional material shared with them to have comparable data collection. But then also it depends on the country, how much effort is taken there and how really this questionnaire is filled in and responded to, which is done as good as we can. But to say a country has a degree of IWRM of 51% is very difficult, and to say the other country has 52% and to really see a difference there. So this so it's probably more valuable to aggregate that into larger groups in terms of very high, medium, high, etc. degree of implementation. So that to get a more grouped assessment, and that's also the way the maps for implementation of IWRM are color coded to get an overview of where are we with this target around the world. Are there other questions, Alexandra? I hope you can hear me. Alexandra? Next question, please. I get a message from Neha that there's a lag. I'm just waiting for 30 more seconds. I was asked, I repeat the question, I was asked to elaborate on the water footprint. Alessandra, now I see you on screen. I can't hear you. I think you're muted. Okay, I will just continue. Good. Water footprint. As I'm not 100% sure about the background level of the audience, but in general, you know how much water we actually use per day? Many Western countries, it's maybe 110 to 150 liters a day. The little that we drink is down to 2 liters, maybe 2.5 liters, something. So it's actually 1% or so of the total water consumption, domestic water consumption. But the biggest water consumption is actually not so much from the water we use in the household. The biggest water demand that we execute is through the products and through the production patterns, the way the products are produced. Look, for instance, at the food, agricultural products. There is a significant amount of water and other natural resources necessary to produce food. For instance, the drastic example often is beef. We see that to produce a 1 kilogram of beef, it can be as much as 15,000 liters of water. It varies a lot of how the cows or the beef is grown up and what kind of rangeland we have, and is it irrigated crops or non-irrigated fodder, and so it depends on many things. But you see that through the consumption pattern, we have a so-called water footprint. Globally, in a globalized world, everything is connected. A lot of the consumption that, for instance, is consumed in North America or in Europe is produced in other continents, in other countries. For instance, coffee and tea can come from Latin America or from Africa. Soybean comes also from the United States or from Brazil, for instance, the European market. Livestock products, milk, dairy, as well as beef or other meat can also come from Latin America or from other places. And through the global trade, we also virtually trade water. So for every product, also the cotton of my shirt, which maybe the cotton is grown in Sudan or in Pakistan, but if it's irrigated cotton, a lot of water was necessary to produce this white shirt. And it can be as much as 2,000-3,000 liters of water for one shirt. And through trading of these products, they also have a so-called water footprint. And that water footprint is part of our consumption patterns. There's people saying that if you wear a lot of clothes on a certain day, it could be that your clothes you're wearing uses already more water than all the water you were drinking so far, if you up to the age of 40. The water footprint is a concept that is not directly involved in the SDG monitoring process, but part of sustainable consumption and production patterns. It is very important to be aware of water and other environmental footprints of the products. I hope that explained that question. There was a question on eliminating inequalities. Well, let me quickly. If we plot different data sets, for instance, the GDP in a country versus any of the WASH indicators, is it basic water or is it safe water or safe sanitation or basic sanitation, you can always see the higher GDP, so the richer the countries, the better is the access. Yeah. So in every country, the wealth is important parameter also for people having access to water and sanitation. If you look within a certain country, you also see huge inequalities. You see that in any countries, if the average is say 70%, you have in some members of society have 100% access to basic water, to basic sanitation. Other members of society have only 30 or 40% access in that group. So there's a huge inequality. Where does that come from? Often we see inequalities when we compare urban areas with rural areas. There's also inequalities if you look at different municipalities. Some are richer, some are poorer, and also within the same municipality, when you look at the rich or the poor, you see a very different access to water supply and sanitation. You also see that so-called vulnerable groups, which includes people in slums or ethnic minorities or migrants, often have unequal, poorer access to water supply and sanitation. So we see that for different members of society, we have very unequal distribution when it comes to access to water supply and sanitation.
Stefan, thank you.
Yes.
Apologies, everybody. We were having some technical difficulties with the hang up with the Google and everything, but everything seems to be working again. So we had one question from Robert Giffo. How can we be involved in catalyzing SDG 6?
Excellent question, Robert. I strongly believe the SDGs is not an agenda of the UN. It's rather, it's not of the UN agenda, it's an agenda that should be owned by the member states. But who are the member states? It's made out of people. It's made up of everybody. It's every member of society is an important stakeholder. And if you want to achieve better access to water supply and sanitation, it is, sorry, that was my telephone. It is it's all of us who make the difference, and we all need to be involved. That starts with awareness of how we which goods we consume, how we produce the goods, from where do we buy them. It also starts with the willingness to pay maybe for certain services, and also being aware of the inequalities. I hope that message came through the technical problems. I'm not sure if all what I've been saying before was already was received by the whole group, but I believe we need to understand and know the inequalities in a country. Only then we can also change that. One key is an activity where we work at UNESCO WAP, the World Water Assessment Program, which where I work, is also measuring the inequalities when it comes to water and gender. And we can see that the access to water supply and sanitation often also depends on the sex. And having sex distributed data in water, understanding the different roles of men and women at the very local, at the household level, up to high-level policy and decision-making is very important. There's also an indicator framework has been developed for this, for measuring that, and understanding the situation better also then helps to create more awareness and to set better policies. So to answer Robert's question, it's anybody's business. It's something that has to be achieved at local scale. It depends on where you live. Maybe water issues are when it comes to access and water and sanitation in schools or in health facilities, or having sex-separated sanitation facilities, either in schools or in health or public facilities. It really depends on where you live to be more concrete to Robert's question, but I would like to stress that it's really everybody's problem and everybody's obligation to also make the difference.
All right, thank you very much. So the next question comes from Georgie Albacete, and she's wondering how is the importance of having access to hot water for hygiene addressed in the SDG 6? There seems to be a gap in this respect.
Yeah, I can only agree to the comment made by the colleague. If you look at the target 6.2, it has a component of hygiene, but the indicator so far is people having access to safe sanitation. And what the data shows that 4.5 billion people, that's more than half of the global population, lack actually safely managed sanitation services. 2.3 billion people lack even basic sanitation services. And there's almost 900 million, that's about 12% of the global population. They even practice or have to practice open defecation. So they don't have any access to appropriate sanitation facilities at all. So that's the situation when it comes to sanitation. Hygiene is not an own parameter. I think we all agree how critically important it is. And as long as every single day, almost 1,000 children die because of very preventable diseases like diarrhea, which is often caused by poor water supply and sanitation. This clearly demonstrates that we have a problem when it comes to hygiene. There is no separate indicator yet. Hand washing, having water and soap available at space is kind of a sub indicator as part of this 6.2b, having water and soap available. In terms of data, there is not enough data to really have a global estimate to really say how the situation globally looks like. But in the less developed countries, that are where country data was available from the GMP program, it shows that only some 27%, if I have it right, or 25% of the people in developing countries have access to water and soap at the sanitation facility. So it's a big problem. It's often underestimated, and I very much agree with the comment made.
Thank you very much. So the next question comes from Fabian Changwang, And he wonders, let's talk about innovation. Recently, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation launched some off-grid technologies for water sanitation. This solution might help to improve access to safe sanitation with lower investments in structure compared to traditional or centralized on-grid systems. Do you think that SDG 6 indicators might embrace this off-grid technology?
Well, the indicators of SDG 6 do not say safely managed sanitation services in a centralized system or something. No, if it's safely managed, so that the whole procedure is managed up to the management of the fecal sludge and everything, then decentralized solutions can absolutely count for the indicator to answer that question. I also personally believe if we have some countries where the access to basic sanitation is very low, many of the developing countries, and also the quick and very fast urbanization that we observe in many parts of the world, it will be impossible to have a centralized sanitation systems as in many Western countries. And to retrofit that in a fast-growing country or a big mega cities like Laos, etc., it will never happen. It's very costly. To retrofit that is really, from an infrastructure point of view, very complicated. So decentralized solutions can be the right solution in either urban areas, but even more so in densely populated rural areas, where centralized systems are maybe inefficient because of the central transport of the feces and the wastewater. So decentralized systems can absolutely be as good as centralized systems, can be even more effective when it comes to costs, and can also be more effective in terms of quickly making a difference. So I believe that particularly for the developing world and rural areas, also in the middle income countries, decentralized solutions should be upscaled. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so next question from Harun Sieg says, water is considered an underpriced commodity. What do you think is the way forward in terms of improving pricing to increase investment yet ensure equal access to all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good question. Access to water and sanitation is a human right. Yeah, so it is. But on the other hand, water is also an economic good. So therefore, it is priced. And I also believe in many circumstances, if it's for free, if it's too cheap, this does not facilitate very economic management of it. So having a proper price for the water is very important to also stimulate efficiency in economic behavior. Now let's look at the drinking water supply and cost. If you look at different parts of the world, we see that can be quite significant. For instance, in Latin America and the Caribbean, on average, there is more than 20% of the population who have to pay more than 2 or 3% of their domestic income for wash services. 2 or 3%, if you don't have much money, it really hurts. So it is a relatively high percentage of the household income for 20%, for the poorer quintile particularly. So it can be efficient. Now, I think the question was, what do I think about proper pricing? Let me allow two statements. In many developing countries, we observe something very strange. We see that a water service 24/7 for so-called or for richer neighborhoods, which are connected to a grid, they often pay much less per the unit volume of water, say for the liter of volume, than people living in poor neighborhoods and slums, for instance, which need to be supported by water vendors. So a much better service is actually cheaper than a less good service for poor neighborhoods. So it's very unfair, arguably. So it's really unfair. So therefore, this pricing at the moment is in these situations, particularly this was examples from slums in the developing world. Therefore, this needs to change. How to do it properly very much depends on the local circumstances. maybe it is the right thing to make a basic amount of water very cheaply available for everybody. So to having access to the basic needs, how many water, like 50 liters or something, or ideally a bit more, really to satisfy the basic needs for the people, to make that very cheap, or giving subsidy to the people who have problems to pay for a fair water price. I personally think this is not necessarily the UN attitude to this. I personally feel making it for free is not the solution, because of what I said before. It doesn't facilitate economic behavior with the management of water. But either subsidize the poor, or making a basic water amount available for very little money are ways to go forward to come up to more equity when it comes to access to water and sanitation.
All right, thank you. So next, Roberto Schifo, who previously asked how can we be involved in catalyzing SDG 6, he has a follow-up question wondering, he says, thank you, how do we find work in developing countries to assist in catalyzing SDG 6?
Sorry, can you repeat, how can we find work, or what was?
Yeah, how do we find work in developing countries to assist in catalyzing SDG 6? Maybe he wants some tips on different organizations that work with this kind of work, or institutions. That's how I understand the question.
Well, I hope I understood the question correctly. Thank you, Robert. Well, it needs an investment. If we want to make a difference, and if we want to do what I said before, we need to run faster. We need more commitment for water supply and sanitation. It needs investment. Why is this investment actually a very good one? Because every dollar invested in water supply and sanitation pays back for society with actually quite significant multiplier. On average, UNICEF has estimated that every dollar put into the water supply and sanitation sector pays back to society with factor of 5. It depends a lot on the country. It depends already how far they are with access to basic water and sanitation and safe water and sanitation. It depends on the labor costs and on many things. But for all countries, there's a positive multiplier. This positive multiplier is maybe a bit less, maybe factor 2 to 3 when it comes to drinking water, but factor 5 or even more when it comes to sanitation. So why is this investment not happening? That's really strange. And first is, I would like to say that this multiplier only applies if we also consider all macroeconomic costs and benefits. So having better water supply and sanitation increases also for people to go to school or to go to work. Everybody knows the story, the enormous amount of billions of hours every year spent by women in fetching water for domestic water use. This prevents from the women or the girls, who are often in charge of that, to go to school. So it's work, for sure. Fetching water for families is a lot of work, but it's an unpaid work, often not considered, and it's considered a productive work. So we might disagree with that. But it's preventing them from doing other work that is externally paid. So it needs investments. It needs a realization that these investments actually are needed for really strengthen society, because many jobs depend on water supply and sanitation. The World Water Development Report 2016 was on water and jobs, and we could show that about 80% of the jobs are directly or indirectly depending on water supply and sanitation, also including water resources, so industrial jobs. So you see, this is absolutely critically for the economy as it is for the people. And if these investments are there, then also jobs come with it. I hope that answers Robert's question.
Thank you, Stefan. Next question comes from Joanna Guterres Carvajal. How can private investors help to address SDG 6 outside of the business fence lines?
Thanks, Joanna. answering the last question, I was speaking about the necessary investments that need to come. So where does this money come from? Let's have a focus on the developing world. We see globally, it varies from region to region, that there is commitment from foreign aid to improve water supply and sanitation. Actually, this commitment did not change dramatically over the last 10 years. It's roughly 5% of the total ODA disbursements. So of the total overseas development assistance, total disbursements, about 5% go to WASH, water supply and sanitation, drinking water supply and sanitation. In some areas, actually, they have declined. And if you compare that with agriculture, that was tripled over the last 10 or 12 years, water remains stable. So ODA, overseas development assistance, will not be the solution. It's rather stable. It's only part of the solution. Where the investments have to come from is from commitments from domestic resources. So countries have to invest themselves. And also development and countries have an important role to play. I come to the private sector now. Development banks and national money has a role to play to make water supply and sanitation projects bankable. That also private sector or commercial banks invest into the sector. Often water investments are long-term investments. So it's something where you need a lot of upfront capital investment at the beginning, and then there's a very long payback period. For instance, you need to invest in a dam, and to build up that dam and the water distribution network, etc. It needs a lot of upfront capital and then a payback period over the next decades. It needs stability in the country, and commercial money, including private sector investments, will only come in if there's a guarantee for a long-term investment. If the country is fragile, politically fragile, private sector will not invest because they're too worried that, considering the long-term horizon we need for these investments, there is too much hesitation to invest into the water sector. So facilitating private sector investment, that was the question of Joanna, if I got it right, needs risk management. And that risk management has to come from overseas development to some extent, but even more so from national country resources or domestic investments, as well as development banks can also play a critical role here to de-risk the investments and to enable some stability over the coming decades. And this facilitates also domestic finance and also private sector investments, that this becomes a sexy sector for investors.
Thank you. Next question comes from Luis Hernando Gomez. He's wondering, less developed countries need international support to achieve SDG 6. However, the position of several of them is passively waiting for funding. How do you think we can motivate them for a proactive position in this?
Thank you, Luis. That's a very good question. I wish I know the answer, but I'm also not 100% sure if we can say that countries are passively waiting. Maybe you have your own experiences and can motivate that statement. I would be a bit hesitant to formulate it like this. Anyway, what we see from the UN GLAS data, that's a global analysis for water and sanitation, and they were analyzing how many of the participating countries, and I think it was 104 countries, how many of these 104 countries can report that they have enough financing to meet their national WASH targets. And 80% of the countries said, no, we do not have sufficient financing to meet the national WASH targets. So they are setting the targets, but they, for whatever reason, they are not able to meet these targets. If they're passively sitting there and waiting, I'm not sure. I think this is more a number of reasons. There's the lack of financial resources to make a difference. There's a lack of capacity in the countries to obtain more money, to make projects bankable, to be able to also absorb the attention that could come from development banks, international donors, philanthropic donors, national sector money, etc. So that also needs a lot of capacity to be able to deal with that. So it's lack of investment, lack of capacity. Sometimes it's also a governance system, a legislation, a framework of policies, a strategies, etc., that do not really facilitate implementing these projects, even if the overall objectives of the projects are known. So it's a mix of different things, and how to motivate them. I'm not sure if it's a lack of motivation. If the awareness is there, if the will is there, the motivation is there as well. But it's really the lack of capacity, lack of having access to the latest knowledge, having access to the latest innovations to make a difference here.
Okay, thank you. So next question comes from Shadi Faisal, who wonders, regarding safely treated water, what are the best criteria and procedures to be followed as activities to achieve social acceptance? To use safe and productive use of water as drinking water in rural areas mostly. You want to take it again?
I hope I understood the question. I think it was a question about what is for rural areas, what are the best practices for drinking water?
What are the best criteria and procedures to be followed as activities to achieve social acceptance in rural areas? Use the safe water safely and productively.
Well, there's quite some literature, including from the UN system, for this. When it's about drinking water, I would refer to procedures and guidelines from WHO, for instance. And I don't know all of them by heart, but I think there's a plethora of documents giving guidelines also for improving situation in rural areas. What is locally, what really works is very difficult to say in such a global discussion, because it depends on the hydroclimatic situation, depends on the surface water, groundwater systems that are dominating the region. It depends on the technology, on the access of resources to have the best solution. It really depends on a number of criteria to improve the situation. So I found it difficult to say, this is the best practice to make the difference here. And one more word, if I may. It's also not the same in the whole world. Really, what is socially acceptable depends on the biophysical parameters, which I just mentioned, but also on societal needs and parameters. It depends on cultural and ethnic values and procedures that also we need to take into account. So it's very important to look at the area that you want to develop with better services, to look at the societal needs, which are also influenced by cultural and some ethnic considerations as well. So sorry for being a bit vague with my answer, but that's as much as I can say in this global discussion.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Donna Iridel. From all the data that has been collected, what types of nature-based solutions or biotechnologies have been presented as at that source solutions for SDG issues?
Well, nature-based solutions are very important. I would like to refer also to the World Water Development Report 2018, so last year's World Water Development Report, which was on nature-based solutions for water. And in this report, as well as in other literature, it is discussed how nature can really help to solve water management problems. Looking at water quality enhancement, for instance, about 80% of all wastewater, including agricultural wastewater and all the wastewater, industrial, domestic wastewater, if you collect everything together, about 80% of the water is not properly collected and treated before discharge back to the environment. So there's a huge amount of wastewater that we discharge to the environment, not cleaned or insufficiently treated. Treatment of wastewater often requires investments. Well, I said before that these investments have a multiplier and pay back for society, but still require investment. In some circumstances, decentralized nature-based solutions can do such a good job that they are equally good to large-scale gray infrastructure solutions. So it really depends on what is the neighborhood, what is the density of people, and what are the problems at play. But there were many examples. For instance, I think it was in Colombia in the US, not a developing country example this time, where a conscious decision was taken. Instead of investing into a large wastewater treatment plant, a series of treatment ponds was invested. So the wastewater was collected and then treated with so-called nature-based solutions, with wetlands and treatment ponds in a cascading system. And the effluent, so the discharge after the treatment process, was from a quality as good as you would have achieved in a large gray infrastructure, with like in a treatment plant. But on the other hand, the investment was much cheaper for the municipality, as well as other benefits. Nature-based solutions have a number of co-benefits. For instance, the wildlife benefits from nature-based solutions. In these treatment ponds and the wetlands, wildlife find their habitat or come back to the region. Often nature-based solutions are also labor-intensive, though they provide jobs. Often they carbon, so carbon sequestration is another argument for nature-based solutions. So there's a number of co-benefits coming with these nature-based solutions, which really can tip the investment decision from a classical gray infrastructure solution to a green infrastructure solution, to a nature-based solutions, which can be much more efficient. It's not always like this. There's also problems in water management where nature-based solutions have their limits. If you think about extremely contaminated wastewater, or if you think about flood protection against for a nuclear power plant or something like this, then nature-based solutions are maybe part of the solution, but you also need gray infrastructure, real flood defense infrastructure, or other solutions for extremely contaminated wastewater to deal with that. But very often nature-based solution, or the best blend of nature as well as classical gray water infrastructure solution, are the way to go, also to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you. Next question from Nitesh Dulab. How can water reuse help in accelerate the 2030 agenda?
Oh, great question. And I feel the reuse of water is highly underutilized. I said before that about 80% of all wastewater, is not the domestic wastewater only. There we have a much higher cleaning rates. But of all wastewater, including agricultural wastewater, we about 80% of the water is discharged back to the environment. So what a waste, This water is water. It can be used for irrigation or landscaping, etc., depending on the treatment, can be also reused as drinking water. On the other hand, reusing water in industrial processes can be not only good for the environment, but also financially very beneficial, because maybe the water has certain metals or organic material that are very toxic for the environment, but can be reduced in an industrial process again and again. And there's a lot of developments in industry to come to so-called zero liquid discharge industrial processes. So there's a lot of progress. Much more needs to be said, Nitesh. I agree, that's very true. And when it comes to drinking water, let us all think about a spaceship. You probably heard of the ISS, that spaceship that circulates around the Earth since 2000. So since almost 19 years now, that spaceship is circling around the Earth. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no water kiosk in that spaceship. There's no rainfall, and there's no groundwater body in the spaceship. All the water on that spaceship is there and has been brought there and is reused again and again. So, of course, with a treatment process. So from a technology point of view, reusing water again and again up to drinking water is possible. Of course, a spaceship is a very expensive solution, but it is possible. And we know that reusing water again and again is possible and must be part of the solution also achieve the 2030 agenda.
Thank you so much. So next question from Erin Jordan. What are your views on the food, water, energy nexus, and do you think it fits in with achieving SDG 6?
So far, I was, Erin, thank you for the question. So far, I was speaking about, sorry, just to get some numbers. I was speaking as a water person, you know, with a water-centric view. But I fully agree with Erin, which implicitly said that water is used for many purposes and many uses, and there's very strong interlinkages to food, energy, and ecosystems. If you look at the global withdrawal rates, you see that globally, some bit less than 70% of the water is used in agriculture. Some 19% globally are used for industries, and this includes energy production. And some 12% go to municipalities, but mainly domestic use. So you see that the bulk, the lion's share goes to agriculture. While this percentage has been decreasing a little bit over the last years, globally, it's still, the absolute value is still increasing. So we use more and more water for agriculture. We use more and more water for industry. And despite what I said before about zero liquid discharge from industry, we see globally a rather increase of the global water demand when it comes to industry. So it's more and more. So we cannot solve the water problems, particularly when it comes to water scarcity, with looking at the water sector only. We have to look at other sectors and the main water uses. This depends per country, region per region, country per country. In agricultural-based economies, it can be as much as 90% of all the water withdrawals in a country that go into agriculture. So saving water there makes a lot of water available for other uses, including domestic use or industry. So more efficient water use in agriculture can be absolutely part of the solution, and it is, as it is also for industry. So the water energy nexus, what you ask about, is absolutely critical to come up, to set the right policies and use water wisely, as well as developing the other sector. For energy, one more number, if I may, we see that about 4% of the global electricity goes into the water sector. You know, to pump water, to treat water, to distribute water, you need about 4% of the electricity. Maybe it doesn't sound a very big number, but if you see the water sector itself is also not so big. So it is a significant amount. We also see that this is predicted to further increase. The total energy is likely to increase. The energy demand is likely to increase. So is the water, or the electricity used for the water sector. And it's crazy. For instance, the electricity need for water treatment is also predicted to increase. And while this is true, we know also that we can design wastewater treatment plants nowadays that they're energy positive, so that they are rather producing energy instead of using energy. So it really needs to implement the knowledge and technology that we have already now to make wastewater treatment not an energy intensive process, but rather making wastewater treatment plants little powerhouses and export energy.
All right, thank you so much. We can take maybe one or two questions more, then we have to wrap up. We just have a few minutes left in the broadcast. Next question from Marie-Louise. Does the SDG 6 goal take a circular economy approach, and is there a scope for this approach in achieving the goal?
Marie-Louise, yes, of course. You know, the water cycle is also part of the circular economy. A lot of the discussion about circular economy is about plastics and about metals, but or clothes and other things. But also, I think water should be a central component of that discussion. Mind you that a lot of the fluxes are transported through water, and wastewater using and reuse, which we discussed 10 minutes ago, is a critical part of the circular economy. Wastewater has water which can be used for irrigation or for other uses, landscaping, or re-infiltrated to use it for drinking water, etc. But also it has organic material. That organic material can be used as biofuel. Therefore, wastewater treatment plants can also be designed in an energy positive way. So it contains energy. The wastewater itself has also higher temperature often, so also the temperature of the water itself can be used for energy. Furthermore, it has nutrients. These nutrients can be and should be reused again to grow plants. So the nutrients should also be recycled of the wastewater, as well as it can have interesting metals. So the wastewater from industrial processes can well be used to use it again and again for other industrial processes. So water, nutrients, organic material, energy content, as well as metals could also be recycled and reused again and again. And we have to go into that circular thinking, the linear thinking of using something and depositing it to the environment is absolutely it's the wrong way of thinking. We know that, but also I believe in the water cycle thinking, which is maybe implicit in the circular economy, as the circular economy is implicit in water cycle management. That needs to be formulated much better in policies, so that we get off that linear thinking of treating wastewater and discharging it to the environment, but rather reusing, recycling again and again.
Thank you so very much, Stefan. I think we have to wrap up. We just have a few minutes left. Is there any final comments you want to share with us, or?
Well, thank you for all the questions. I think I was not able to answer all of them, but it shows that the audience was interested in the topic, and I think it's all of us who make the difference here to achieve SDG 6. Hopefully I meet some of you in person, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for participating in this webinar. I mean, we've had so many questions. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to answer them all. And again, apologies for the technical issues that we've had. We'll try to do better next time. I just want to, again, thank you very much, Stefan. And I also want to thank our audience for being active and asking so many questions. It just shows how engaged you are all. And I really hope that you continue to be so. So we will have a second webinar on the 30th of January with John Matthews from the Alliance on Global Water Adaptation, and it's the same time as this one. So I hope you all will watch and contribute to that one as well in the discussions with all your many interesting and valuable questions. Again, thank you so much, Stefan, and I hope that we will have you again for another webinar, hopefully. So thank you so much all for watching, and have a great evening or day, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.